Good afternoon, everyone. We will be getting started in just a moment. And so thank you for joining us today, and we'll give everyone a minute or two to join. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thomas Rogers, and I lead the K-12 communications team at Whiteboard Advisors. A few housekeeping notes just before we get started. First, we'd love for you all to introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to share your name, where you're from, and what organization you're with. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll dedicate the last 15 or so minutes to respond to questions you post from the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, along with any resources shared, will be sent out to everyone who registered tomorrow. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'm excited to be joined today by an amazing group of education leaders to explore new and emerging methods for developing and assessing essential skills, from literacy and numeracy to the creative and cognitive skills students need to thrive. Now we'll do a little bit of a round robin of introductions, and I will hand it over to Yigal first to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here. My name is Yigal Rosen. I am the Chief Academic Officer at BrainPop. My main role is to ensure that all of our products and programs deliver on the promise of learning outcomes for all students.
Hi, I'm Ellie Elizabeth Mokier Horner. I'm a Senior Program Officer on the Early Learning team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and my work focuses on funding managed R&D processes to transform the landscape of assessments in that space.
Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Purifoy. I am the CEO of Learning Economy Foundation, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we solve for upwards mobility by putting learners at the center.
Oh.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. I am Bo Stjerne Thomsen, the chair of Learning Through Play in the LEGO Foundation. I oversee our research and knowledge on how children and students develop and learn through any aspect of playful experiences.
Great. Thank you all for that. And for those of you who dropped in the Q&A, we did fix the chat, so it should be up and running now. It looks like it is based on the chat. So to get us started, I would love to just drop in an opening question to understand the current landscape. What is the current landscape of assessment, and why do you think we need new methods for assessing skills? And so we'll let folks jump in. We'll keep this casual and conversational.
Well, I can speak about in the pre-K context, which is where my work focuses. These are really young children, and in the United States, these are programs that are neither compulsory nor universal, and public pre-K programs are usually aimed at children ages 3 to 5 who are either close to or experiencing poverty. And we know that these programs, when they're high in quality, can lead to substantial, lifelong, even intergenerational benefits for enrolled children. But those benefits are not conferred if children are not developing the critical skills that allow them to succeed in schools. And right now there are basically two ways that early learning systems are tracking and understanding the development of children and their systems. Some are using adults in the children's lives to rank them on their skills. And while we believe that teachers and families are experts on the children they see every day, direct assessments provide additional insights and also information that can be meaningful across contexts, so that teachers can both tailor their instruction and also be armed with interventions that have evidence. And the gold standard on these direct assessments is really has quite a narrow focus on things that are easy to measure, like early numeracy, letter recognition, et cetera, which, are important, but I cannot overstate how critical it is to support children at this age to develop their relationship with school, like a growth mindset, how they approach problems they don't know the answer to, how they advocate for themselves using language. So, the current status of assessments does not meet the needs of teachers or systems in the early learning context.
Great. Bo, do you want to jump in next on this?
Absolutely. Yeah, likewise, I see a lot of opportunity right now. Just reflecting on whether it's really a landscape or it's more like a jungle right now. I think it's hugely exciting. There's a lots of diversity, but it's also, I believe, really difficult for many to find a way around this landscape or jungle right now. But I think it's an exciting time for education and for assessments in particular. So many of the things that we have standardized for content and knowledge for more than a century can be addressed and measured with technology. And I think in the spirit of what I think the topic is here, I think we can shift towards truly unlocking the potential of students because we don't need to assess and compare students based on narrow criteria where everyone should be good at the same thing or telling them they're not good enough. Living up to the same high expectations for everyone to do the same. But we have now mechanisms in place that are more process-based, formative, contextually rich to demonstrate real-life practical skills that are more holistic. So I think the landscape is very inspiring right now, and many stakeholders are in place to begin to collaborate on new ways of assessing and supporting student growth.
Buddy Gall and Chris.
Sure. So it's definitely, I would agree with Ali and Bo on the need for advancements in the assessments. I can speak from the, on the BrainPop side, in terms of how we see that and how we kind of, advance that, and definitely in collaboration with others, Lego Foundation and other organizations. It's really, if you think about the types of assessments that, almost kind of were dominant for decades. There are like large assessments, as to Bo's point, highly standardized large assessments, state assessments, right, or even national assessments like NAEP in the US or PISA or TEAMS on the international scale, that are really built for a very specific purpose, right? For mostly for accountability for administrators, and really trying to kind of make the way into the ability to help kids, help learners really to develop the skills. But this is not really the main purpose of those assessments. Then you have what we call the benchmarking assessments, right? The interim assessments that some districts, some schools, deploy. And those assessments are almost like built to try to predict the performance on this large state assessments, on this large high stakes assessments. And I think basically, if you think about the range of, the more broader educational goals, if we think about how we ensure equitable learning outcomes with students, all students, it is really the major role is really for us to unpack the potential, unlock the potential of much more embedded assessments. Assessment really designed to help children, to help learners, to help students drive skill development, and skill development in a much broader sense. So as you mentioned, Thomas, at the beginning, we really have to go beyond just literacy and numeracy. Yes, those are foundational skills, very important for us to make sure that we provide, really very strong and very engaging, impactful learning experiences for students, and definitely assessment. It needs to be also very engaging and very, very meaningful. But how we go beyond that, how we can actually help students reach their potential, how we can help them provide insights on skills like creative thinking or critical thinking, and other very, very essential skills that are less repetitive, are probably some of the skills more challenging to assess and more challenging also to develop. So this is where I believe we should really, much more work and really work with educators, work with diverse populations to make sure that those formative assessments or embedded assessments that are much more holistic will be available for educators, for students, and for families.
Great. And Chris, any thoughts to close out on this question?
I mean, so much great, ideas have already been mentioned here, but I would just say that, I think we've learned that one assessment doesn't necessarily fit everyone, and that education isn't necessarily linear. And I think that moving towards a progression-based assessment, I think helps us understand a little more holistically what is happening with the learner, because, just because you're at a certain age doesn't mean you should have a certain milestone always. There are different ways that people kind of progress through their life. And so I think the more that we can personalize the assessments and the more that the assessments can really speak to my individual progression, I think the better we're going to be in the end.
Yeah. And so moving on, what are promising ways to develop and measure holistic skills like creativity while also driving equitable learning outcomes? Who wants to jump in first on that one?
Well, I think it would be good to highlight some of the work that we have collaborated on also in terms of creativity with EGAL in particular. What we see right now is creativity and critical thinking and so forth is getting even more important. That the holistic skills that is about not only knowing things well, but being able to apply the knowledge to practical problems is getting more important, and finding new ways to do that. So I think we can use technologies now to be able to be much more process-based, adaptive, formative, so to speak, so they actually help you along the way based on real life activities. So we have separated to some degree real life practical activities from both education and from assessment. So the new instruments that allow you to capture that interest, to document, to share, and to provide support for progressions is a very important step now. And I think for us, what that also means is when we talk about equity is when we design new types of assessments, we need to integrate the ones that are being assessed in the design of these technologies and these methodologies. So often they have been designed with a narrow group in mind, and actually there's a lot of opportunities now to demonstrate potential by being more diverse in the way these assessments are designed also.
I can add to that. I share Bo's enthusiasm for the possibility of technology allowing for much better and useful assessments. I really think a lot about the burden that the assessment paradigm places right now on teachers in a pre-K setting. These kids are, they're pre-literate, they're not taking multiple choice tests. A lot of these assessments are very hands-on. And so thinking about ways in which this can be done, reducing burden and ensuring that teachers are given actionable, real-time, just-in-time information is a major component of this work in my mind. And imagining a world in which children, these children also have had a very limited number of experiences thus far in their lives. And so allowing them to use their own language, their own words, and I mean language both in the micro sense of like how they speak at home, but also like a different language to answer questions like what happened yesterday. And then, we can understand how they're using language and help them support them in their development. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities to use technology to measure both important skills in an easy and actionable, in an easy way for teachers that's actionable, and also while improving equity, excuse me.
Sounds great, Thomas. If I can share my screen, just really to highlight some of that work that also, of course, Bo mentioned, I'll try to do that. Just let me know if people can see the screen. Just switching to the presentation mode. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So just to share with the audience here, definitely it's a really great opportunity. So I will just start. I mentioned some of the more of a larger assessment, more standardized assessments at the beginning, where really the goal is to create a great opportunity to see where students are really in a more of a comparative scale. And this is what typically the state assessments on the NAEP, the national assessment in the US, or the PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, will is really designed very well to do. And I definitely, as a project director of PISA 2022 Creative Thinking, the first global assessment of creative thinking, I can tell that we were trying, for instance, to build really wider range of those assessments and more engaging assessments, much more. Much wider range of those type of experiences for students, but at the same time you have those major constraints, right? This will have to be standardized, this will have to meet certain criteria. These are not necessarily designed for skill development. They're much more designed for really make inferences on where students are in their skills. And just to highlight some of the work we've done, definitely on the PISA side, but then BrainPop and of course the Lego Foundation, we basically were looking into how we can take that really great framework that we have designed for PISA 2022 creative thinking and really transform this framework into much more formative assessment tools that can be applied across the board and really drive skill development with all students. So if you're looking into the definition of PISA 2022 creative thinking, is really about the ability of students to engage effectively, productively, generation, evaluation, improvement of ideas that can result in original, effective solution, can contribute to advances in knowledge, and can help with expression of imagination. What a wonderful definition. We transform this definition into three skills that we can actually measure, and as a consensus, international consensus of experts, we agree that those are the skills that we can actually build assessments for, and hopefully help educators around the world basically transform that into more of a formative tools and learning opportunities for all. So those are the three skills: generate diverse ideas, generate original creative ideas, and the ability to evaluate and improve ideas. Now, the big question, to what extent these skills can be actually measured? We were able to demonstrate that in in PISA 2022 in a large scale with a really large number of countries and more than 100 different languages and cultures, that it is possible. You can actually measure that. Now, the next question is, to what extent we can actually transform this assessment to be helpful, to be useful for skill development. And this was the focus of our work with Bo and Chris, and of course, with a larger community of educators and partners. The main question we were really trying to optimize for, and the whole experience, is really to what extent we can measure growth in those skills such as creative thinking while students actually engage, or learners or children are engaged in more of a learning through play activities that can be more of a learning at home. Those activities can take place in school or in even the kindergarten and so on and so forth. So wider range of those activities, and really across different ages, right? So how we can do that. So we developed certain tasks that we were testing with students. It was more than 200 students that we tested these prototypes with, and definitely there is a way to go to really do more of a large scale kind of better testing of that. But this is the notion how we can take a significant framework and assessment tasks that we know worked well in high stakes assessment or in larger scale assessment like PISA or NAEP or even state assessment, really transform those tasks to be much more in the context of driving skill development. So what we did, if you look into those three skills that we prioritized for PISA 2022, we basically expanded that into a wider range of skills to really focus on skill development. So how we can provide optimal opportunities for learners, for children to engage in creative process, even before you reach the ability to develop those original ideas or diverse ideas. How you engage them in this process, what type of indicators, what type of early indicators we can see, and how we can design that with the learning progression in mind. I think Chris mentioned that, how we can design basically not only for 1 point at a time assessment, but really assessment can be formative and can be part of learning experience. It can be part of engagement. with those different experiences. So we created the learning progression. We create for each of those skills. We created those different tasks that we engage kids in really learning through play. And it was not only in the digital space. You will see some examples. It was also in a physical space. So you can see some of the activities from students, and we typically had a number of levels. So the first level was typically about following certain instructions, really to start the process. The second level of those tasks was much more associated with trial and error and really trying different type of solutions. And the third level was much really deeper into creative process, coming up with original ideas that not many children, not many other learners will think about. And it was really about these 5 different creative skills that we were trying to measure and see to what extent we can actually have the ability to measure, but even more importantly, the ability to inform skill development. You can see some of the other examples from younger kids to 10 to 12-year-olds. When they were building certain models, they will take a picture, they will upload that picture. We had scoring rubrics to score those and really certain questions that we embedded across the experience, kind of embedded assessment. So it's really part of the learning. It's not really something that you just isolate the learner from and really, asking a set of questions. It was really embedded assessment within those experiences involving physical space and digital space as well. What we've seen, and I know that we're going to talk a little bit about the AI capabilities, we've seen that we can actually adapt AI models that can provide us with proficiency estimation of those skills. And as we have more and more what we call engagement events, or actually activities students are engaged in, the better, the more accurate estimation is going to be, right? So you can see here after 4 or 6 activities, we can see that the standard error part of the model will decrease. It means that we have much more predictive, much more accurate estimation of their proficiency. This is something that is we typically see in the assessment world, with educator and learning sciences. We typically see this type of accuracy in estimation proficiency in really numeracy and literacy skills that we knew how to measure for decades, if not more than that. But now we really a really exciting point where we can actually measure some of those holistic skills, what we call hard to measure skills, applying some of the AI tools, but really learning design and assessment design that comes together to create really those impactful experiences. So just to highlight a few, I don't want to take too much time here, but we were able to show how students grow in their skill development. So you can see here, those bar charts will show us when they started, after 3 engagement events, after 3 activities, and how they basically make progress as they go in terms of those proficiency levels. That the most important part for us here is really not the comparison between students or between cohorts or schools or different subgroups. It's really about each individual student. So you can see those transitions. So those transitions, basically students or learners, children that advance on some of the skills from 5, 6 events to 10 events or 10 different activities. And some students, we have better estimation right now. So we know that actually they're in a low proficiency. So this is how we were able to measure that creative thinking skills as a holistic way, but also we established certain measures for each of those skills. Like I mentioned, we have 3 to 5 different skills we were able to measure. So we were able to basically see how students make progress as they engage more and more in those activities. So this type of measurement, this type of embedded assessment, formative assessments, and some of the models to estimate proficiency and provide insights to the learners themselves, to the families, to the teachers, and stakeholders is essential for us. So this is where I do believe we need to do much more work and really engage a larger community in developing those type of assessment, those type of experiences that really will be impactful, powerful, and will ensure that all students have access and all educators have access to these tools and this ability to help learners develop the skills. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Yigal. Does anyone else have thoughts to add on that front? Well, Yigal alluded to this a little bit when he mentioned artificial intelligence, which I'm sure we've all seen dozens of articles every week for the past few months about the role of AI in education and how it's going to change it or not change it. But which leads me to our next question. What role do emerging and developing technologies like AI, like voice tech, play in assessing student skills? Anyone want to?
All right.
Here, I'll speak to it. Yeah, please go ahead,
Chris.
Ellie.
No, please, Chris.
No. Well, I think that obviously there's a step function change that's happening right now, not just in education, but across the world when we start looking at, natural language models and how they can start to change the way we do a lot of things. Obviously, learning in general is going to change quite a bit from that. But so will assessment. We talked about this when we were at South by Southwest, but when you think about this new time of life, I like to liken it to manifestation technologies. We find ourselves kind of in a new world. The last 100 years largely marked by information technology, the storage of computers, teaching us how to store information, and internet, how to transfer it, and so on. But we find ourselves now in a world where we can kind of use our words to do remarkable things. And you fast forward to the end of that 100 years down the road, and you have Star Trek kind of create me an apple pie, and it comes out, and this, it seems bizarre, but this is kind of the world we're heading into. And so when you look at that through the lens of education and assessment, it does become interesting, I think, because up until now, there's always been this kind of holy grail for personalized education, and personalized education largely depends on the personalized assessment, right? Because you can't really personalize education unless you really have a good understanding of what each individual, I guess, how each individual is approaching each problem and each subject and each item and each event, if you will. And AI really does start to bridge that gap, right? And I don't think we fully know how to do it yet, but I think that there are many studies that should be done to start to get at it, right? I mean, even just at a very base level with some research we've done, which is really, research these days is just pulling out ChatGPT and playing with it, which is rather remarkable. But you can feed it quite a bit of information, and it can tell you, a personalized idea as to what's going on with the student. Now, there's quite a few different related items that I think, when you look at what Yigal was speaking of, the work we did together with Super Skills, it was really remarkable, and it allowed for, the learners to kind of earn skills along the way while they competed in well, actually not competed, but while they participated in skill quests. And it was rather fun, and they were able to kind of assess themselves and give feedback and information. The truth is, we're at a place now where we can start to do this in a much better way, right? Imagine a drawing, and AI can actually read that drawing and come back and tell you about that, right? So we can start to take and collect all of those items that up until now have pretty much just lived on a fridge until they find themselves in a drawer, and we can start to link those together into a progress. What is the progress of the cognitive abilities of a child? And this is really quite remarkable. Again, I think there's quite a bit to learn. And obviously, when you start handing it over to AI, there are definitely going to be some challenges with that as well. So, it's definitely not a silver bullet, but I think it does offer us the ability to start to get at a large amount of information that we could never really have been able to do before. With personalized education being kind of this holy grail, I think we're closer to that now. The ability to feed in all of my childhood education. And then you start looking at, the need for learning and employment records, which is maybe something a lot of you know about, but this idea to have a personalized kind of lifelong learning record, lifelong learning portfolio that has carried with me all the way from pre-K to gray, that information now can be really remarkable for helping to do a lot of things, helping to personalize the education, helping to train an AI tutor, helping to personalize all sorts of education related to me. So again, the verdict is out as to if it'll actually make everything better or just make everything wilder, but it definitely helps us, start to understand more holistically what that larger data set is that we just has really just been untappable up until now.
Chris, I really liked what you were sharing. And I too hope that technology plays a role in which it can amplify a teacher's impact, providing them with access to information about the children in their classroom and the interventions available that are highly tailored to the individual needs of the children in their classrooms. And also that this information can be made available at a much lower burden for them. And actually, you know, at the Gates Foundation, we have funded an initiative that's being run through a key intermediary partner, MDRC, called the Measures for Early Success Initiative, which is a managed R&D process for like a user-centered design process that will develop a new paradigm of early childhood assessments. And, you know, we've been really excited in that initiative about assessments that tailor technologies that are tailoring assessments to a child's individual needs and interests, hyper-tailored information, and also about automatic speech recognition. Again, these children are pre-literate, and opportunities to make screen-free assessments with, for example, tech-enabled toys. It's a blue sky in many ways about the ways technology can be helpful. I think that one of the watch fors is something that I know you have worked on over at the Learning Economy Foundation around just making sure that the data that are available are supporting teachers and children and are, you know, discouraging data misuse. For example, with young children, it's not appropriate to evaluate a teacher based upon a child's progress during the school year. You know, this is not a universal program. The children in the classroom are highly, it's not random. And so you really don't want to be using the data in that way. And so I think that one of the big questions is how data securities are put into place so that it discourages or even makes impossible data misuse.
Yeah, and I'll just say one quick thing about that. I completely agree. And I think that as we find ourselves moving into a very data-rich future, it seems like as we start thinking about AI and some of, you know, using big data to do assessments and such, it becomes more and more crucial, right? And at Learning Economy, we spend a lot of time thinking about what could go wrong, right? And so from that, we started thinking about how important it is to have consent mechanisms, you know, consent flows that allow for us to manage that end to end, for us to have transparent indexes of how data is being used, the ability to have handshakes that are anonymous, and really, and also along with that, data literacy. You know, I think that a big piece of this is just understanding what this means, right? Because, you know, there's a difference between good AI and creepy AI. There's a difference between good assessment and creepy assessment, and good data use and creepy data use. And I think that as we start to understand the difference, I think that it's important for us to educate people about that and to create consent flows that allow for us to do that in ways that, you know, to Ellie's point, are, you know, so we need to lock ourselves out from being able to be evil. You know, the old Web 2 motto was, don't be evil. You know, let's move into a world where it can't be evil. Let's create protocols for ourselves where we actually can do this in really safe ways that don't have the kind of, you know, the kind of ripple effects that some of the Web 2 issues have had.
We have a number of educators joining us today. And so for the next question, want to think about them specifically. How can new models of assessment support educators in their classroom, and how will that impact their instructional practice?
Yeah, I think that we're just collecting data right now and examples of how educators are using technologies based on also, you know, decades of work that have been in the past. But I think the starting point is that the new technologies can be used to reduce, administrative tasks. Sorry, that just jumped down. So leave that. Sorry. So reducing administrative tasks, help them to get better ideas for curriculum and activities, and then focus more on teacher interactions with students. So there's a shift in how much administration and how much they need to sort things and organize things. And what we've seen now in new types of assessments that are developed now with our partners across 5 countries being tested is that if you get that richer data set on what happens in the classroom, and you get help to understand what the activities are, it helps you to differentiate instructions also. So right now we have forms of assessments where you document, you use technologies to say, well, maybe I have other ideas to be able to address that particular student or that particular group. So actually that way of adapting instructions is something where technologies can be helpful. So I think we are shifting much more towards the project-based, experiential, problem-based forms of learning where this can be much more manageable. I think what Chris was touching upon also, I think what the main challenge we still have is around the data, not only managing that data and the consent for that data, but to be sure to get real life, personal interest, meaningful projects into the mix of things, and similar to the examples that Yigal presented. So I think that requires more agency to the students, that they are actually part of documenting, understanding the context they're doing, the process they're engaged in, because then you have much more richer conversations and improving the instructional practice.
That's great. I'm happy to add that you can feel a little bit connect to the previous question about AI as well. So in my view, again, we are really transitioning to kind of a different phase of really teaching and learning in the classroom. It's in part, of course, driven by some of the AI capabilities, but also in part, really much more insight that we have now from learning sciences and research, practices and what Bo mentioned before. So, for instance, it is going to be, we might want to call it like augmented teaching. With some of the AI capabilities that will be available, right? So right now, most of this amazing, generative AI capabilities we see, they are not really built for the teaching and learning, right? They are not really built for skill development. They're typically built for prediction, right? So it's to predict what you would expect to see next, what you will vote thumbs up and thumbs down. So it's really built for those capabilities, and then of course it can be adapted across the board. So we'll see more and more of those AI powered capabilities that will be fine-tuned or adapted really to drive learning outcomes. So this is the next step, right? So to me, it's really how we can take some of those capabilities to help the science teacher drive the ability of students to really come up with a great way to do observations, collect evidence, and come up with the claim evidence reasoning process, right? So how can we use kind of a co-pilot, if you will, or AI assistant to provide those insights to the teacher, to provide those insights to the student, but really optimizing for driving learning outcomes and equitable learning outcomes, right? So this is the next step, and this is what I think we will see more and more. It will take time, to really, back to what Bo said, to see real data that will show that those augmented teaching and learning or an assessment capabilities really lead to those intended learning outcomes, what needs to be changed, what needs to be fine-tuned, where we see certain wins in the classroom or outside of the classroom. But this is in part what we're going to see. What I was sharing, the proficiency estimation of some of the skills we were really struggling to measure, right? So how would you, in terms of assessment and insights, basically those new capabilities provide us with much more room to see, to engage students in what we call performance-based assessments, as opposed to multiple choice, easy to measure, easy to auto-score activities. Now we will see basically that those artifacts that we've seen on the screen before, or in a science classroom, or in the English language arts or math classroom, we will see much more of that capability to provide just-in-time insights to the teachers, and also certain recommendations for activities you might want to consider, right? So the really challenge is going to be, or the opportunity is going to be, to build those augmented tools for teaching, learning, and assessment that can really drive learning outcomes. This is going to be the kind of the next step of that, and there is definitely a lot of research that needs to be done to ensure that it's working, and certain capabilities that will work in one context, they will show less of a promise in different contexts. So this is really the opportunity for us as a community of researchers, developers, educators, to really make sure that we contribute to that workflow. We are very much encouraging teachers and students to try out new things, innovative technologies, but really just want to highlight that some of that there is so much benefit, but really there is so much work that still needs to be done to really optimize those capabilities to drive learning outcomes.
What should school and district leaders be doing to prepare for shifts in assessment? Like what action do they need to be taking now for the changes we should see in 3, 5, 10 years?
I can start by saying that what we have identified is that assessments is the most critical lever to reimagine education. So emphasizing creativity and critical thinking and collaboration as an important outcome of education, because it also strengthens academic content and curriculum understanding and so forth. So what district leaders can do is to go with a vision for that type of holistic perspective of education and help bring together the community, the parents and the teachers, because often educators are caught between different expectations. And if you don't have an aligned vision for education for the school community, then it's very difficult to implement this. So I think the visioning around holistic formal education is very important. In the light of technologies right now, what we've seen is that they need to provide that opportunity and professional development for teachers to experiment with it, to test and try out the boundaries and talk to the students about what it helps the learner differentiation. And that requires some support in terms of showing best practices to support innovation and support co-creation. But the visioning piece and the support for educators in trying these technologies with students is absolutely critical. And it will come back to increasing the other outcomes, which seems to be very clear from other studies we've seen.
Yeah, I just want to underline something that Bo said, that this participatory practice, of co-design is so important to ensure that we get, that teachers from all different levels of years of experience are participating in the participatory feedback and are being compensated for their time, which is, I guess, more feedback for funders than for you guys directly, but to make sure that you're compensated for your time in providing this feedback on these new tools, so that the technology is in service of teachers rather than another thing on the list that is required of them.
Yeah, I'll add, my hope for the next few years is that some of these new technologies can help bridge, into a future where teachers really just have to teach. They don't have to do as much of the hands-on logistics. The truth is the more that they can just focus on what they do, in teaching, I think the better the students will be. So, any way that the technology can help to personalize it, can help to understand the progresses, that can help to, disseminate, personalized learnings and, help to manage a lot of the standard logistics that teachers have to deal with, I think the better. Let them focus on the impact.
Yeah, I'm happy to add, just definitely agree with everything others said, but I think we are right now in the process of definitely identifying, where technology can be helpful, when AI can, again, support some of those main goals of education, and where there is a really true differentiation for, for humans, for teaching, a little bit what Chris just said before. What are those moments? What are those activities and experiences that are essential for, for really well-being, for students' well-being, for teaching, for skill development? There are so many things can be automated, right? We can see so many great things eventually in a few years from this co-pilot or some of the tutoring that can be done very well. And we see some examples right now from few players in the educational learning market. But it's really about this distilling the value of human, and I highlight a little bit in some of the slides I shared before. It is really about with what Bo said before. It's a bit much more of a holistic approach that will be very, very essential, right? How we can really drive some of the really essential skills that AI has almost no place in, right? So it's really about the human factor that needs to be part of that development, and definitely it's about developmental stage of the learners, of the children, right, where we really need to have much more emphasis on this human to human interaction, but it needs to happen in physical space as opposed to just almost transitioning into the virtual and the more of a digital space, right? So really bringing those worlds together and really empowering teachers with tools, with professional development, and with capabilities that are really built to drive this holistic approach, those the skill development, the human human essence, the human factor in this human to human interaction that cannot be really replaced by AI in any way. So this is really about the empowerment as opposed to replacement, or as opposed to what can be automated, right? Really, where is this human power? How we can empower teachers? How we can provide the the best experiences for learners with growth mindset in mind, and be able to help develop those skills, as opposed to really experimenting, but also applying in large scale certain tools that are not necessarily built for that. There is going to be this trajectory, I think, over the next definitely 3 to 5, but even in the next year or two, where we will see more and more of those promising tools that can show also evidence of really being able to help empower teachers, empower students. And I think those tools will, or those capabilities, those experiences are going to really almost like lead the way until the next big transformation.
Thank you. So as a reminder, we're going to take audience questions now. Feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit those. Looks like we've got a few coming in. Our first question is, what are your thoughts on assessment tools in informal settings, for example, libraries, museums, and even in the home? And it looks like, Bo, you want to jump in on that one first.
Sorry, did you mention me?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like you had tagged that you're going to answer the question, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. For us, some of the most exciting assessment tools exist in informal settings, but also because that's where some of the most exciting experiences exist. So libraries and museums and science centers and so forth actually have opportunities and materials and, to some instances, access to real life practical problems also. So what we see is a much more blurring of in-school learning and learning outdoor in the community and at the museums and libraries, not only as places and venues for learning new things, to demonstrate what you do, to develop portfolios, but also for teachers to develop and try new practical activities which AI will not give. It will give you suggestions, but you need to test it out yourself. So in that instance, the whole linking together the ecosystem will be much more interesting and exciting going forward.
Anyone else want to jump in on that, or move to the next question? So the next question is from Elvira. What key points can we impress on our school boards and policymakers so that we can start to veer away from today's standardized tests? Elizabeth, I see you nodding. Do you want to, that one you wanted to jump in on?
Well, I mean, again, I work in the early learning space where standardized tests are not really the norm, but as a parent, I was nodding at that. And that, I hear this a lot from people in government and families who have been part of our human-centered design process, is this fear of replicating some of the standardized test challenges that exist in the like older grades in an early learning environment, and having it be high stakes for the child, student, for the test taker, and also for the people in their educating community. And that is something that we have been very mindful in the development of the Measures for Early Success initiative to veer away from. That really that the data are in service of the learner and of the teacher. And part of that is at the system level, right? And testing for the effectiveness of different types of interventions with different types of learners. But it's really all about arming the teachers with interventions that work. So I don't have an answer to that question, but I agree with it.
Yeah, I think I would just add that the main question is whether standardized tests are helpful in improving student learning. And I think that's where the deficit is sometimes. You don't get that proper feedback, whether to improve your school environment or differentiate instruction and so forth. So I think that's the first point. The other thing is obviously the amazing number of resources that is spent on these types of tests and preparing for it. Imagine what you might be doing instead to focus on the process of learning and other types of formative assessments. And it's not because you don't need them. I'm sure they have a function, but you could probably do more like a sampling or other ways of limiting it, and then focus more on something that actually benefits the educators and students.
Another question we got. With new, and I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit here. With the introduction of assessment that uses technology, whether that's headphones or computers or requires connection to the internet, when technical problems pop up, it's inevitable. I'm sure every time, at least once a week, everyone on here has like a Zoom where like someone's having technical difficulties. What steps can teachers and districts take to make sure that they don't have those technical hiccups during assessment? Are there any recommendations for them?
I think a lot of that falls on the developers, to really, I think that part of the best defense we have against those types of user errors are strong user-centered design processes with like alpha testing and beta testing and constant feedback, and to view as for early adopters to really view themselves as debuggers, thinking back to at the beginning of COVID where we were and where we are now, we can see that the rapid adoption of things like Zoom, actually a lot of the quirks have been worked out. It is a lot better, but part of that is the continued learning process and users viewing themselves as providers of feedback, and then also to put a lot of pressure on the developers of new tools to make their stuff as user-friendly as possible, as intuitive as possible, so that it isn't something with a steep learning curve in which ongoing technical difficulties can provide a renewed sense of frustration.
Thank you. So another question, what makes you optimistic that teacher prep programs can make the necessary shifts in time, as prospective teachers are going through their programs?
I think there was a survey recently by the Walton Foundation that illustrated how teachers are excited to try these things out. I think many teachers and educators generally are desperate, finding new things that make their profession more, less administrative burdening and more interesting and more directly working with students. So I think that these technologies are more engaging than we see right now, if we can catch up on the other comments here that actually are good regulative standards for the solutions that are given. But we are seeing in other countries that a teacher prep program now includes trying different technologies, different physical materials also, really visiting schools and see how life really is in a complex classroom also. So there are developments now that confirm that teaching is a very hands-on practice, and that there are exciting ways of getting to know more about it.
Yeah, I'll add, just from my perspective, being a classroom teacher myself, a former teacher in the past, teaching educators at Harvard, and now more on the development side and really driving some of the work at BrainPop. I can tell the best, probably one of the best experiences I've seen, especially with my students, future teachers, was really the participation in co-design, right? Really being part of this co-design process. I think Ali referred to that a little bit. When you are really truly immersed in those universal design for learning experiences, right? When you truly immersed in some of this prototyping as a future teacher, it will really provide you with the tools not only to build those yourself or be part of that in the future. It's really the ability also to evaluate what will work for my students in what context. What would it take to really adapt the system to the needs of my students. So being part of those experiences, of co-design experiences, not necessarily a specific system or specific company at all. It's just really being part of this co-design experience in a teacher preparation program is really key to to build those skills, to build those capacities, and really be able to evaluate and also adopt those more promising technologies, as opposed to certain things that might seem working well, but really you don't necessarily see evidence. So I think seeing the evidence, so it's a little bit of that more of a research view as well, or efficacy research view as well, is also essential. But I would say the number one thing is really to be truly immersed, have that experience in your teacher prep program as part of this more immersed universal design for for learning or assessment type of programs is really key to be able in the future to really be successful and help drive those decisions. I think one of the questions was how you help drive the district board some of the decisions. I think having more of those experiences, or wider range of those experiences, is very, very helpful for future educators.
And for our last question from the audience, the question is about the use of age segregated grades, and if reform is possible and without abolishing age segregated grades. And so, Chris, I think you want to jump in on that one.
Well, I would just say that I think there's nuance to this, and I think there are different ways of looking at it. But I think it is true that the learning process is not linear, and I think there is some truth to the fact that segregating by age isn't necessarily the right answer. I think it potentially was the best answer for a time based on what we knew. But I think the more we're learning about the way that learners learn, it goes back to, I think, where I started in the beginning, which is that we do need a more personalized approach to assessment, and the more that we can start to understand where a learner is, then we can start to, I think abolish is a strange word, but I think that we can definitely start to reform those ideas towards better ideas. That's the path of science, and I think it should be the path of us as educators as well. As we learn new ways, we should be able to start to personalize that education. And so I think that when it comes to age, I personally know that it is true that what's a milestone for a learner at an age is not the same milestone for another learner at that same age. And so understanding where they're coming from, the types of learning that they are, and meeting them where they are, I think is definitely the future.
Great. Well, we are at time for today. I want to thank first our panelists for joining us, and to all of our attendees for spending the past hour with us. If you have questions, please reach out. We'll circulate tomorrow the recording along with some of the resources that were mentioned. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.